Hey y'all, before we begin, I want to give a little context to why I'm recording this episode. I am in the middle of a big promo period because my couples course begins this coming Monday on February 23rd. And I really went back and forth on whether to record this episode right now or not. Because when the political climate feels this unstable, talking about relationships can feel small and indulgent and incredibly secondary. But the more that I sat with that instinct, the more I realized that the opposite is actually true. The conditions we are living in are reshaping nervous systems and increasing vigilance and polarization. Whew, and I'm going to cry probably a couple times during this episode. The conditions we're living under are narrowing ambiguity tolerance, and they are straining intimacy. And my work, the work that I do with couples, is about shared power and regulation and accountability and restoring relational safety. And those are not apolitical skills. They are psychological and somatic capacities that authoritarian systems have eroded. So if you've been following along this season, you know that I've been really focusing on relationships and how relational literacy affects how easily you can access pleasure. And I just can't continue talking about those things without the larger context of the environment we are living in right now. And after sitting with it for a bit, I have come to the conclusion that this couples course is needed now more than ever. And because I am recording this on the day it is going to be released, it's also probably going to be a little bit more rough than it typically is because my editor is my beautiful partner. And because of the quick turnaround, I am going to be using my very amateur skills to get this out as quickly as possible because when two people learn how to regulate together, repair humiliation, share power consciously, and tolerate difference without collapse, they build resilience. And resilient partnerships create resilient individuals, and resilient individuals strengthen democratic cultures. And for the few listeners that I have on this podcast, I wanted to get this out before we begin on Monday because community container that we've got that starts on Monday is not selling escapism. It's teaching relational capacity in destabilizing times. And if you're listening while also feeling strain in your relationship, I want you to understand something really fundamental. That strain isn't random. It is shaped by the climate you are living in, and that's what we're going to unpack today. And if at the end of this episode you recognize that you need structured support to stabilize your partnership inside this moment, that's exactly why Reset Your Erotic Rhythm exists. So let's begin. We are in a period of democratic instability. In real time, we are watching institutional trust erode. We are watching loyalty elevated over truth. We're watching power consolidate even more than it has in the past, or at least it's becoming more obvious. And we are watching shared reality fracture. History is very clear about what authoritarian drift looks like. Fascism doesn't begin with camps. It begins with the corrosion of truth and the normalization of lies and the slow exhaustion of the public. It begins when people can no longer tell what's real and eventually stop trying. And we are at risk of that erosion happening. And there's the Epstein case, a documented trafficking operation involving powerful men, a death in federal custody under extraordinary circumstances, sealed records, redactions, institutional opacity. And whether you lean left or right, what that represents is elite impunity. And elite impunity destabilizes a population. When people see that power protects itself, trust fractures. When trust fractures, The nervous system does not stay neutral, it goes into vigilance. And you may not consciously be thinking about everything that's happening in the political climate while you're doing the dishes, but your body knows when the ground feels unstable, and you'll feel it as a low hum of anxiety, maybe more reactivity, less patience, less libido, less tolerance for ambiguity, more black and white thinking. Your body is bracing. When the culture begins to tilt toward authoritarian energy, that energy does not stay in Washington. It does not stay in headlines. It moves through your nervous systems, and I think we're all feeling that. It moves into marriages and relationships, into bedrooms, because power distortions at the macro level reshape psychology at the micro level. If the culture normalizes dominance, grievance, suppression of dissent, and collapse of shared reality, we will unconsciously reproduce those dynamics in our intimate relationships unless we are paying attention. The body cannot separate political instability from environmental instability. It registers both as a lack of safety. This environment is affecting your relationship. Your nervous system is operating under chronic vigilance. Vigilance narrows perception. It reduces nuance. It makes disagreement feel very dangerous. It makes uncertainty feel intolerable. Romantic connection requires slack in the system, and slack requires safety. Safety requires stability. When the broader culture feels unstable, intimacy feels heavier. So this episode is about giving you language for what is happening in your body and in your partnership so you stop misdiagnosing cultural stress as personal failure. Understanding the environment changes how you interpret the symptoms that you are feeling, and that interpretation can change everything. So the word fascism is circulating constantly on social media platforms and arguments and in headlines. What makes early stage authoritarian drift difficult to recognize is that it normalizes gradually, and each shift feels incremental. Each boundary adjustment feels arguable. The psychological effect of this gradualism is subtle, but super profound. When institutional predictability weakens, individuals experience a loss of orientation because humans regulate through stable maps. Institutions function as external stabilizers. Courts, elections, media, due process, they're psychological anchors for us. When anchors weaken, vigilance increases. And vigilance is going to alter your cognition and your perception. It's going to heighten threat detection. It reduces tolerance for nuance. It pushes thinking toward binary conclusions. And we are all living inside of sustained uncertainty right now. And that environmental condition matters so much to your relationship because organisms adapt to environment and nervous systems calibrate to ambient threat levels. Defense and intimacy are neurologically competing states. If your nervous system is already operating in heightened vigilance because the broader culture feels unstable, your margin for relational ambiguity is going to shrink. You're going to become sharper, more absolute, less patient, less willing to sit in the gray. And if you don't understand the environmental pressure shaping that psychology, you are going to misattribute the tension that you feel to each other as personal. Understanding the field restores choice, meaning understanding all of the subtle activation that you are feeling puts your system back online to make decisions that are aligned with your values. But this goes further than personal relief. Relational stability is not a private luxury in destabilizing times, it's infrastructure. Authoritarian drift depends on chronic agitation, it depends on exhaustion, it depends on fragmentation, and it depends on people who are too dysregulated to think clearly and too isolated to cohere. Connection completely interrupts that. Love stabilizes perception. Secure attachment widens tolerance for ambiguity. Intimacy restores nuance. Co-regulation strengthens cognitive flexibility. None of these are sentimental qualities. They're neurological and somatic capacities. A regulated partnership increases your ability to think critically, and your ability to tolerate disagreement without collapse, which is something we so need right now. It reduces susceptibility to grievance-based manipulation, and it prevents narrowing that destabilized systems produce. Isolation makes populations easier to polarize, fragmentation makes them easier to mobilize, and exhaustion makes them easier to control. Secure relationships counter all of that. Your relationship is not a distraction from civic life or your civic duty. It's part of the psychological substrate that determines how you show up inside of it. Love, connection, erotic aliveness, shared reality inside your home, these are stabilizing forces in a destabilized culture. If your home becomes a site of co-regulation, shared power, and psychological safety, the broader pattern will weaken because macro systems are built from micro nervous systems. And resistance begins with preserving the capacities authoritarian structures erode: clarity, nuance, connection, dissent without rupture, power without domination. Intimacy cultivates all of those capacities. This is why this conversation matters so freaking much. So let's talk about the Epstein case as the cultural rupture that it is. A documented trafficking operation involving powerful individuals, a plea deal widely criticized as unusually lenient, to say the least, sealed documents and then redactions, and then a data dump that was meant to destabilize everyone and put them in a state that makes it impossible to not numb. And that sequence is signaling something really specific to the public and collective nervous system. The power protects itself. In effect, institutions function as attachment structures at scale. Attachment theory tells us that when a trusted caregiver fails to protect, the nervous system reorganizes around vigilance. It scans for hidden threat, it anticipates betrayal, it reduces openness, it increases defensive posture. The same reorganization can occur collectively. When institutional accountability appears inconsistent or selective, people recalibrate their trust thresholds. Skepticism increases, information seeking intensifies, ambiguity feels unsafe, perception narrows. So you might be noticing a compulsion to gather more information or a pendulation to the opposite side of complete avoidance. And all of this is going to influence your relational perception because your nervous system is operating inside of a climate of distrust. When trust fractures at scale, intimacy requires more conscious effort to preserve softness. And a little bit later on in the episode, I'm going to talk about how you show up in your relationship is activism in itself. But first, I want to talk about this truth that for many people in this country, what is feeling destabilizing right now is absolutely nothing new. Black Americans have lived with uneven enforcement of law for generations. Indigenous communities have lived with broken treaties and systemic erasure for centuries. Immigrant communities have navigated arbitrary power and vulnerability as a baseline condition, and queer communities have experienced rapid shifts in rights and legitimacy depending on political tides. Minorities have been saying for decades that institutional protection is not distributed equally. And I think one of the most shocking things for many of us that have more privilege is that we are seeing it fully naked right now before us. And when that truth is before us, the nervous system has a couple of available responses when it goes into extreme activation. It's got hyper control, collapse, aggression, numbness, and there's another response available to you, and that is aliveness. Authoritarian systems depend on fatigue and despair and on people who are too exhausted to feel deeply. Collapse is useful to unstable power structures. Numbness is useful. Fragmentation is useful. What is not useful to authoritarian drift is a population that is embodied, connected, erotically alive, and capable of deep relational bonding. Pleasure keeps you mobile. When you feel your body fully, breath, skin sensation, you interrupt dissociation. And when you experience desire, you interrupt collapse. When you choose intimacy over outrage cycles, you widen your nervous system, not for escapism, but for preservation of capacity. There is something profoundly stabilizing about two regulated bodies touching each other with intention. It reminds the nervous system that safety exists somewhere. It rebuilds trust in the immediate environment, and it restores softness. And softness increases nuance. Feeling your body right now is a radical act. Staying sexually alive in destabilizing times is not indulgent. It is a refusal to shut down, a refusal to let chronic agitation colonize your nervous system. You can metabolize fear through movement, through breath, touch, orgasm, connection. You can move stress through your body instead of storing it. You can literally fuck it out, not as denial or distraction, but as discharge. Pleasure mobilizes. And mobilized nervous systems think clearly, and clear thinking strengthens resistance. And resistance also requires stamina and vitality and embodiment. Your relationship is not a problem to solve in this political climate. It is a site of energy production. It is a place where you generate coherence instead of fragmentation. Love is a stabilizing infrastructure, and eroticism is nervous system expansion. You staying alive in your body right now matters deeply. Not because it solves anything overnight, but because it prevents you from collapsing into the psychological states make authoritarianism easier to sustain. Now more than ever, pleasure is not frivolous. Intimacy is not apolitical. It is fuel. History shows that durable resistance movements were sustained by communities that maintained relational bonds, cultural rituals, music, touch, humor, sexuality, and joy alongside political action. So if you take nothing else from this episode, I just want you to take this. The way you are feeling right now makes sense. If you feel sharper or more tired, or intimacy feels heavier or impossible, if your patience is thinner, or your body feels braced, conversations feel more loaded, that's not random. You are living inside sustained instability, and your relationship is going to absorb pressure from a field that you did not create yourself. And that doesn't mean that there aren't real issues to work through. It means that context really matters. And you deserve to interpret your tension accurately instead of turning it into self-blame or partner blame or we just aren't compatible. And it also means that you don't have to navigate this alone. When the broader environment is destabilizing, trying to regulate two nervous systems without support is incredibly difficult, and we weren't built that way anyway. Community is more important now than ever. And if you've had curiosity for my couples container that starts this Monday, February 23rd, check it out now. Get that support. Because if you've been interpreting what you're feeling as we're growing apart, or I'm not as attracted, or he's changed, or she's more intense, or we just fight more now, we need to zoom out. You are not living in a neutral environment, and your nervous systems need more support than they do in calmer times. Most couples try to solve this privately. They assume it's their dynamic, that they should be able to work it out on their own. But you're not just negotiating personality differences right now. You are learning how to love in a world that is making it incredibly difficult at the moment. And you don't need to white knuckle your way through this. So anyway, we begin Monday. I hope this helps. I hope it helps you feel a little bit more seen. And I hope to see you inside. And I hope you find the community that you need.